Wessler, a 35-year-old attorney with the American Civil Liberties Union, ACLU. At issue in this case is the government's warrantless collection of 127 days of petitioner's cell site location information, revealing his locations, movements, and associations over a long period, Wessler said. Before Wessler could even utter his fourth sentence in his opening argument, Justice Anthony Kennedy jumped in. "What is the rule that you want us to adopt in this case, assuming that we keep United States v. Miller and Smith v. Maryland on the books?" Justice Kennedy, most often dubbed the court's crucial swing vote, was referring to two bedrock cases dating back to the 1970s, which enshrined the third-party doctrine. The idea of the third-party doctrine is that individuals relinquish their reasonable expectation of privacy when they transact via a third party like a phone company. In other words, the data given up by Carpenter, not only what numbers he called, but where he was while doing so, can easily be obtained by the government. In one short question, Kennedy was expressing the anguish that many judges have had to grapple with over the last half-century. Where is the line between appropriate government action when it comes to the surveillance of its citizens? How much privacy do individuals have against the government's use of surveillance technologies, ranging from simple microphones to wiretaps to thermal imagers to cell site simulators to drones and beyond? In Carpenter's case, rather than deploy humans to follow him or his fellow suspects, investigators simply went after his data at Metro PCS. Under the third-party doctrine, police did not need, much less try to obtain, a warrant. But to most ordinary citizens, myself included, this notion seems ludicrous. To the government, getting location data without a warrant is effectively the same thing as having a policeman make physical observations from the street. Modern technology has enabled so much data to be generated by all of us that it effectively has given the government superpowers. Although police could have gathered a limited set or span of past locations traditionally, by canvassing witnesses, for example, never has the government had this kind of a time machine that allows them to aggregate a long period of people's movements over time, Wessler continued a few minutes later. In other words, in the absence of a meaningful restraint, government authorities will continue to push as hard as they can. Since the 18th century, some of the most aggressive law enforcement officers have known precisely where the legal limits were and gone right up to them. Perhaps the most notable articulation of this idea in the 21st century came from General Michael Hayden, who served as both the head of the National Security Agency, NSA, and the Central Intelligence Agency. He has famously said since September 11th, as a top intelligence official, he would play aggressively and fairly up to the line, so much so that there would be chalk dust on my cleats. While Hayden, as a lifelong Pittsburgh Steelers fan, was referring to the national security state, the same logic often applies to federal and local law enforcement as well. However, the problem with playing to the edge is that sometimes the judicial system is given an impossible task, serving as a backstop for years of government overreach. Where and how one can meaningfully withdraw from the watchful eye of the government in the early 21st century remains an open question. A half-century ago, the Supreme Court ruled that if someone steps into a phone booth and closes the door, we have a reasonable expectation of privacy, much in the same way that we do at home. In most cases, the government needs a warrant first to legally surveil. But since that time, as technology has advanced incredibly quickly, the government has understandably adopted tools to its advantage. When I first began as a professional reporter in 2004, I was largely dazzled by the excitement of new technology. Gmail was new, Facebook was just beginning, ubiquitous Wi-Fi was just starting, podcasts entered the lexicon.